Hello. I don't usually write emails like this, but after binge watching so many of your videos about expat train wrecks in Thailand, I feel like I have to share what happened to me. I've been a long time lurker on your channel, and hearing those stories of scams, jail, and heartbreaks from other guys made me realize I needed to get my own story off my chest. This is going to be long, and maybe it sounds crazy, but it's the truth of what happened to me. I guess I just want others to know how a dream can turn into a nightmare. I'm a 35-year-old guy from Ireland. Back in 2019, I was living in Dublin, working as an IT consultant at a small firm called Cyberflow Solutions. I had a nice flat in Rathfarnham, a reliable Honda Civic, and my fiancée, Aoife, who I'd planned to marry that autumn. On paper, it looked good. Steady job pulling in €45,000 a year, savings of €25,000, and a comfortable middle-class life. But inside, I felt restless, like I was stuck on a treadmill going nowhere. Each day at the office felt mundane. Debugging the same client systems, attending pointless meetings about quarterly projections, watching my colleagues complain about their mortgages and school fees. I found myself daydreaming constantly, staring out the window at the grey Dublin sky, and wondering if this was all there was. The breaking point came during a particularly soul-crushing project, late 2018. I was working 60 hours weeks fixing a database system for an insurance company, and I remember sitting in my cubicle at 9 p.m. on a Friday, surrounded by empty coffee cups and the hum of fluorescent lights. That's when I started spending my late nights scrolling on my phone, looking at travel blogs and expatriate forums. Something about Thailand caught my eye. The warm weather, the vibrant culture, the sense of adventure. I'd never been to Asia before, but there was something magnetic about the photos of ancient temples, bustling markets, and pristine beaches. I started watching YouTube videos obsessively. Channels like Living in Thailand and Expat Life in Bangkok. I watched countless hours of videos of Western guys my age sipping coconuts on beaches, riding motorcycles through mountain villages, and biking through tropical jungles. I remember one video in particular of an Australian guy who'd quit his accounting job in Sydney to open a beach bar in Koh Samui. He looked so genuinely happy, so free from the corporate grind that was slowly killing me. I felt a jolt of excitement that I hadn't experienced in years. The more I researched, the more convinced I became that this was my answer. I read about the cost of living, how my €25,000 savings could last me 2 years if I lived modestly. I learned about teaching English, about the expat communities in Bangkok and Chiang Mai, about the 60-day tourist visas that could be extended indefinitely if you knew the system. By the end of 2019, I had made up my mind. I was going to quit my job, break up with Aoife, who had no interest in an expat life and was already planning our wedding, and move to Thailand. The conversation with Aoife was brutal. We were sitting in our favorite pub in Temple Bar when I told her, "You want to throw away everything we built for some fantasy?" she said, her voice shaking. "Lewis, you're having a midlife crisis at 33. This isn't adventure, it's running away." She wasn't wrong, but I was too caught up in my romantic vision to be listening to her. We broke up that night, and I moved back in with my parents while I sorted out my affairs. Quitting my job was surprisingly easy. My boss, Martin, just shook his head when I gave my notice. "You'll be back in 6 months," he said. "Thailand isn't real life, Lewis. It's a holiday." I cleaned out my desk, said goodbye to my colleagues who thought I'd lost my mind, and booked a one-way ticket to Bangkok for January 15th, 2020. In January 2020, I flew to Bangkok with a backpack full of optimism and a heart full of expectations. Stepping out of Suvarnabhumi airport into the humid night air, I felt a rush I hadn't felt in years. The heat hit me like a wall, thick, tropical, alive. The exotic smells of street food drifted from the taxi queue, mixed with incense and exhaust fumes. Tuk-tuks raced by with their colorful lights, and I could hear the distant sound of temple bells. It all made me feel incredibly alive, like I was finally waking up from a long sleep. I checked into a small guest house called the Sapphire Inn near Ceylon Road. Nothing fancy, but clean and cheap at 800 baht a night. My room was tiny, with a narrow bed, a small desk, and a window that looked out into a busy soy filled with massage parlors and 7-Elevens. But I loved it. I spent my first week exploring like a tourist. Wat Po with its giant golden Buddha, the labyrinth alley of Chinatown filled with gold shops with herbal medicine stalls, Lumpini Park where locals did Tai Chi at sunrise. I sampled every street food I could find. Spicy papaya salad that made my eyes water, pad thai from sidewalk vendors, strong Thai coffee that kept me buzzing until midnight. At the guest house, I met Shane, a laid-back Australian guy in his 40s who ran a dive shop in Pattaya. He had that weathered expat look, sun-bleached hair, deep tan, and the easy confidence of someone who'd figured out how to live well on very little money. Shane took me under his wing, showing me the ropes, where to get the best exchange rates, how to navigate the BTS system, which visa agents to trust. He even helped me find a decent motorcycle rental place run by his friend Som. The key to Thailand, Shane told me over Chang beers at a rooftop bar in Sukhumvit, is to go with the flow. Don't fight the system. Learn to work with it. And never, ever trust anyone who promises you easy money. I should have listened more carefully to that last part. For the first few months, life was everything I'd dreamed it would be. I rented a small but modern condo in Ari district near the BTS line. 15,000 baht a month for a studio with a decent view of the city. I bought a used Honda Click scooter for 25,000 baht and suddenly had the freedom to explore the sprawling city at my own pace. I even managed to find a part-time teaching job at a language center called English Plus near Phrom Phong. Nothing glamorous, but it paid 30,000 baht a month and gave me a legitimate reason to get an education visa. The job was actually fun. I taught mostly young professionals and university students who were eager to improve their conversational English. My favorite class was a group of nurses from a local hospital who wanted to practice medical English. They'd bring me homemade somtam and ask endless questions about Irish culture. For the first time in years, I felt useful, like I was making a real difference in people's lives. I spent my weekends exploring the country with Shane and other expats I'd met. We'd take the overnight train to Chiang Mai, wandering through the Sunday walking street market and hiking in the mountains around Doi Suthep. We island hopped in the Gulf of Thailand, diving in the clear waters around Koh Tao and partying on the beaches of Koh Phangan. I felt like a character in one of those travel vlogs I'd watched obsessively back in Dublin. Free, curious, and genuinely happy for the first time in years. By mid-2020, after successfully navigating my first visa renewal, I started thinking about longer-term plans. That's when I met Andreas at a expat meetup near the language school. He was a laid-back German guy in his late 30s who had been living in Chiang Mai for 3 years. Andreas had that effortless expat style. Linen shirts, leather sandals, and a perpetual tan. He seemed to have figured out the secret to sustainable expat life. One evening in June, over cheap Leo beers at a hole-in-the-wall bar in Thong Lor, Andreas told me about a business opportunity he was involved in. "Mate, it's basically easy money," he said, leaning in conspiratorially. "I've got this Thai friend, Natapong, who's got a brilliant plan. We find old houses or small buildings in Chiang Mai, places that have been abandoned by families who moved to Bangkok, and we buy them for peanuts. Then we fix them up with the modern touches and sell them for huge profits to returning Thai families or other expats who's looking for investment properties." He pulled out his phone and showed me before and after photos of a traditional Thai house they'd renovated. The transformation was impressive. From a rundown wooden structure to a charming boutique guest house with modern amenities. "I've already made 300,000 baht profit in just 4 months, Andreas claimed. And that was with minimal involvement. Natapong handles all the paperwork, the contractors, everything. We just provide the capital." At the time, I was still getting my footing in Thailand, but the idea of boosting my savings was incredibly tempting. My 25,000 euro was slowly dwindling, and while I was living comfortably, I knew I needed to think about long-term sustainability. Andreas assured me it was foolproof. Natapong had apparently been doing this for years and had connections with local contractors who worked for below-market rates. Over the Christmas holidays in 2020, I met Natapong at a trendy coffee shop called Roast near the Chao Phraya River. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with perfect English and a friendly, confident demeanor. He wore designer glasses and a crisp white shirt. He looked more like a Bangkok businessman than a property developer. Natapong showed me contracts in Thai, which I couldn't read, of course, and assured me everything was guaranteed safe investment. He had a slick presentation on his tablet showing financial projections, photos of completed renovations, and testimonials from other foreign investors. The numbers looked incredible. Potential returns of 200 to 300% within 6 months. He even had pictures of another house they were currently renovating in a different district of Chiang Mai, showing workers installing new flooring and painting walls. I was still hesitant about pouring all my savings into one investment. Then I got a phone call from home. My father had been diagnosed with early-stage prostate cancer. Suddenly, I realized I might need to fly back to Dublin on short notice, and I wanted to keep some money liquid for emergencies. I used this as an excuse to start small investing. 5,000 euros initially, enough to test the waters without risking everything. For the first few months, everything seemed legitimate. I received regular email updates from Natapong with photos of construction progress. Walls being repainted in cheerful colors, new ceramic tiles being installed, modern bathroom fixtures being fitted. He would text me updates in English, always enthusiastic and professional. I even joined a WhatsApp group with other small investors, mostly Europeans like myself, where Natapong posted pictures of workers hammering away and occasional selfies of himself at the construction site, hard hat and all. Meanwhile, my life in Bangkok continued happily. I had started training in Muay Thai at a gym called Banchamek in the Huai Quang district 3 mornings a week. The physical challenge was exactly what I needed. The discipline, the sweat, the camaraderie with other fighters. I'd ride my scooter through the city in the early hours, watching Bangkok wake up. Street vendors setting up their stalls, office workers grabbing coffee, monks collecting alms. I felt genuinely connected to the rhythm of the city. I kept in touch with friends and family back home, calling Ave occasionally to give positive updates. She had started seeing someone new, a solicitor named Bob who she'd met through work. And while it stung a bit, I was happy for her. She was skeptical when I mentioned the property investment, but I brushed off her doubts. "You don't understand the opportunities here," I told her. "Thailand is developing so quickly. This is exactly the kind of thing that could set me up for life." Then in March 2021, just as the house renovation was supposed to be completing, COVID came back to Thailand with a vengeance. Another lockdown. International borders tightened. Businesses shut down. And the entire expat community went into panic mode. I realized I'd lost most of my teaching hours as the language center cut back operations. My freelance IT work, small projects I'd been picking up online, became much harder to find with the global economy in chaos. I was still covering my day-to-day expenses, but those 5,000 euros I'd invested suddenly felt like a lifeline I couldn't afford to lose. That's when Natapong's messages started becoming more vague and less frequent. First, he blamed delays on material shortages due to COVID restrictions. Then there was permit issues with the local authorities. Then he mentioned another urgent project that was taking longer than expected and required his full attention. The renovation photos he'd been sending stopped updating. The WhatsApp group became quiet, with other investors asking increasingly worried questions that Natapong would answer with vague reassurances and promises of big updates soon. I started having trouble sleeping, checking my phone obsessively for messages that never came. In June of 2021, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I booked a cheap flight to Chiang Mai, telling myself I just wanted to see the progress in person and maybe enjoy a few days in the mountains. On the flight up, I tried calling Natapong repeatedly. When he finally answered, his tone was different. Still friendly, but evasive. "Hello, Louis. You good? Sorry about messages. Just crazy time with COVID and everything," he said casually. I asked him directly if I could see the completed house. "Oh, Louis, listen, I can't do a meeting right now," he avoided. "But trust me, everything very good. Maybe send you more pictures soon." He told me to wait until late July, that everything would be sorted by then. I spent 2 days in Chiang Mai, renting a motorcycle and trying to track down the property addresses Natapong had mentioned. The first address led to an empty lot with a "for sale" sign in Thai. The second was a completed house, but it was clearly occupied by a local family and showed no sign of recent renovation. When I finally found a building that matched some of the photos I had been shown, I realized it was a different house entirely. One that was still under construction, but for what appeared to be a completely different project. My heart sank as the reality hit me. I felt like such an idiot, standing there in the hot sun with sweat dripping down my back, staring at a building that represented everything I'd lost. The safe investment that Andreas had pitched now felt like an elaborate trap, I thought of all the months I had worried, saved, and planned because of this money. Money that was probably already gone. The trip back to Bangkok was one of the longest of my life. I sat in the back of a cramped minibus with tears in my eyes, the humid night air through the open windows feeling heavy and oppressive. By the time I got back to my condo, I was emotionally and physically exhausted. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the traffic below and wondering how I'd been so naive. The next few weeks were a blur of panic and desperation. I spiraled into workaholism just to survive financially. I took on every freelance IT project I could find. Website fixes for small businesses, consulting calls at all hours of the day and night, even basic data entry work that paid almost nothing. I started driving for a food delivery app during lunch hours, sipping through Bangkok traffic on my scooter to deliver somtam and pad thai to office workers. I refused to tell anyone back home what was really happening. When my father called to update me on his treatment, which was going well, thankfully, I lied and said everything was fine, that my investment was delayed but safe. When Afe sent me a message saying she was engaged to Bob, I congratulated her and made up stories about thriving business ventures. The shame was eating me alive. Instead of dealing with my problems rationally, I started draining my remaining savings on desperate attempts to fix my mental state. I paid for online therapy sessions with counselors who specialized in expat depression. I bought self-help books on Amazon and had them shipped to Thailand at ridiculous expense. I started drinking more, not just social beers with friends, but solitary sessions in my condo, trying to quiet the anxiety that kept me awake at night. By late 2021, I was effectively broke. My savings had dwindled to less than 2,000 euros, and I was barely covering my monthly expenses. My nice condo in Ari was out of reach when the lease came up for renewal. The rent had increased to 18,000 baht, and I simply couldn't afford it. I was forced to move to a depressing studio apartment in Samut Prakan, on the outskirts of Bangkok, in an old building that smelled of mildew and cooking oil. The new place cost only 6,000 baht a month, but it was barely livable. The room was so small I could touch both walls with my arms outstretched. There was no air conditioning, just a broken ceiling fan that made grinding noises when it turned. The single window looked out at a concrete wall, so it was almost pitch black inside during the day. I often lay on the thin mattress that served as my bed, pretending to read articles on my laptop, but not really comprehending anything anymore. Food became a luxury. I lived on instant noodles and leftover rice from temple offerings. I'd ride my scooter to local wats during meal times, hoping to get free food from the communal meals they served to the poor. It was humiliating, but I was too proud to ask for help from other expats and too ashamed to call home for money. People had warned me about the dangers of depression and addiction in the expat community, but I had always thought that wouldn't be me. I was wrong. I started taking over-the-counter painkillers daily. At first, legitimately for the headaches that came from stress and poor nutrition, but soon just to numb the emotional pain. I didn't do any hard drugs, but I began buying prescription sleeping pills from a shady clinic near my soy, run by a doctor who didn't ask too many questions. More than anything, I started drinking heavily. By January of 2022, most nights ended with me collapsing on the floor of my studio, crying, vomiting, and occasionally blacking out completely. I remember one particularly bad night, sitting on my mattress with a bottle of cheap whiskey, watching the timestamp on random YouTube videos and wondering what the hell I had done to my life. The loneliness was crushing. My phone was full of dead WhatsApp groups and unanswered messages from friends back home who had given up trying to reach me. Then, one stupid oversight sent everything spiraling into total disaster. I was supposed to do a mandatory 90-day report at the Immigration Bureau in Bangkok in mid-January. In my drunken, depressed state, I completely forgot about it. I was so paranoid and anxious that I barely left my apartment anymore, imagining every interaction with authority figures as a potential trap. When the electricity in my building was cut off because I hadn't paid the bill, I was forced to venture out to sort it out. I rode my rusty bicycle. I'd had to sell my scooter to pay for the food, into the city center to find a payment terminal. On impulse, I decided to kill two birds with one stone. Swing by the Immigration Bureau at Swan Blue and see if I could pay the fine for my late 90-day report and also extend my visa for another 30 days. As soon as I handed my passport to the immigration officer, I knew I was in trouble. He scanned it, frowned, and called over his supervisor. Then he asked me to step aside into a small office. My heart started pounding as more officers arrived, one of them taking notes on an official form. "Sir, why are you late for a 90-day report? You overstayed," they asked in broken English. I started to explain, as truthfully as I could, that I had been going through financial difficulties and had honestly just lost track of time. I mentioned that I was working as a teacher and had been dealing with personal problems. They interrupted me quickly, asking for my work permit and proof of employment. When I couldn't produce either document, the language center had let me go months earlier, and I'd never had a proper work permit anyway. Their demeanor changed completely. The chief officer, a stern Thai woman in uniform, looked at my nearly empty bank statements and shook her head. "You have no job, no money, you living illegally in Thailand?" she said, her voice getting sharper. Every word felt like a physical blow. I whispered that my savings had run out, and I had been trying to survive on freelance work. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You understand this is serious crime under Thai law." They informed me that because I had overstayed my permitted stay by several days and was working without proper authorization, I would be detained pending deportation. I tried to plead for leniency and explain that I was willing to leave voluntarily and pay any fines necessary. I even tried calling Shane, hoping he might vouch for me or lend me money for a lawyer, but he didn't answer his phone. By 2 a.m. that night, police officers came to collect me. They put me in handcuffs and loaded me into a sealed van with 4 other foreigners. 2 Burmese men who looked like construction workers, a young Filipino man who was crying quietly, and a Nepalese student. We drove for over an hour through the dark streets of Bangkok, past the bright lights of the city center and into an industrial area I'd never seen before. The van finally stopped at the Immigration Detention Center in Swan Blue, a gray concrete building hidden under highway overpasses. When the guards opened the door, a rush of humid, stale air hit me. The facility looked like a prison, which I guess it was. They yelled at us in Thai to strip, then took away our clothes, phones, and any personal belongings. I was given a coarse orange uniform that was too small and a thin plastic mattress that reeked of disinfectant. The cell I was assigned to was filled with about 20 men from various countries: Myanmar, Nepal, Philippines, Cambodia, and even a few Africans. None of us spoke a common language well, so communication was mostly through gestures and broken English. We slept on the plastic mats on the concrete floor, packed together like sardines in the stifling heat. There was no air conditioning, just two small ceiling fans that barely moved the thick air. The toilet facilities were nothing but holes in the ground in a separate room with no privacy, and a constant smell of sewage. We were given 2 buckets of water each morning to wash ourselves, and we had to take turns using a small concrete area with a drain. It was one of the most degrading experiences of my life. Each meal, if you could call it that, cost 15 baht and consisted of watery rice with a few vegetables or a small piece of fish. My sister back in Dublin, who I'd finally called in desperation, had wired me enough money to buy food for a few days. I hadn't told her the full truth about my situation, just that I was having visa problems and needed a small amount of money to sort things out. The guilt of lying to her was almost worse than the physical discomfort. I spent nearly 2 weeks in that concrete box, lying on my mat and staring at the ceiling, breathing the same recycled air and listening to the sounds of other men coughing, crying, and talking in languages I didn't understand. It was one of the lowest points of my life. Lower than being broke, lower than being scammed, lower than losing life. I felt like I'd hit absolute rock bottom. Finally, after what I felt like an eternity, I was called to meet with an immigration officer. He told me I would be deported to Ireland on the next available flight and banned from returning to Thailand for 5 years. I would have to pay a fine of 10,000 baht immediately if I wanted to avoid additional jail time. It was basically everything I had left, but I had no choice. The deportation process was surreal. I was handcuffed and driven under heavy guard to Don Muang Airport, where I was processed through a special immigration area I'd never seen before. My passport was stamped with big red letters, Deported, and banned entry 5 years. The immigration officer who handled my case looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "You come back Thailand as tourist only," he said. "No work, no business, no problem. You understand?" On the deportation flights, a Thai Airways economy seat that the Irish government had to pay for, I sat in a seat 23A, staring out the window at the lights of Bangkok disappearing below. The flight attendant, a young Thai woman with kind eyes, looked at me with obvious sympathy but said nothing. I felt like I was in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. I had come to Thailand chasing sunshine and excitement, and I was leaving with nothing but shame and a deportation stamp in my passport. When I landed back in Dublin, under familiar grey skies, nothing was as I remembered. The airport felt smaller, the people looked paler, and even the air smelled different. Clean but somehow lifeless compared to the humid, aromatic air of Bangkok. I had no job, no home, and no plan. My parents picked me up at the airport, and the ride home was filled with awkward silence. My whole life was gone. Ave had married Bob in a small ceremony the month before I was deported. I saw the photos on Facebook. Her smiling in a simple white dress, looking genuinely happy. My job at Cyberflow was filled by someone else. My friends had moved on, started families, bought houses. I felt like a ghost returning to a life that had continued without me. I spent the first few weeks sleeping in my car, a 2015 Honda Civic that had been sitting in my parents' driveway for 2 years. I was too ashamed to explain the full truth to my family, so I told them a heavily edited version, that I had some bad financial decisions in Thailand and got caught up in visa problems. They were disappointed and worried, but eventually my mother insisted I come back inside and sleep on their couch. Getting back on my feet has been the hardest thing I've ever done. I eventually convinced my old boss, Martin, to hire me back part-time. and I've been slowly rebuilding my life. But my brain isn't really here. I catch myself checking flight prices to Bangkok, counting my savings obsessively, and wondering if I could somehow make it work if I went back. The worst part is the feeling of complete failure. I left Ireland thinking I had found the secret to happiness and adventure, only to realize you can't outrun your problems by crossing on an ocean. I came home with nothing but a broken spirit and a deportation stamp. I'm deeply ashamed of how naive I was, how easily I was taken advantage of, and how spectacularly I failed at something I was so confident about. I have nightmares about immigration police knocking on my door, about being trapped in concrete cells, about the moment I realized I'd lost everything. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, thinking I'm back in the detention center. Therapy has helped somewhat, but the shame and regret are always here, lurking just beneath the surface. Despite all this, I keep watching your channel and others like it. I do it almost religiously at night. The stories of other expats who've struggled remind me that I'm not completely alone or crazy. I've learned hard lessons from my experience. Never rely on someone else's guaranteed investment. Always keep a solid emergency fund. And never burn bridges with people back home. Most importantly, I've learned that paradise isn't a place. It's a state of mind. And you can't achieve it by running away from your problems. If I ever go back to Thailand, and part of me still hopes I will, as a tourist with proper planning and realistic expectations, it will be to prove to myself that I can handle it without delusions or get-rich-quick schemes. I want to show that I can appreciate the country for what it really is, not what I imagine it to be. I guess I just wanted to share my story because maybe it will help someone else who's dreaming of the expat life. Chase your dreams, absolutely, but stay grounded in reality. Thailand is an amazing place with incredible opportunities, but it's not a guaranteed paradise where your problems disappear. Do your research. Trust, but verify. Keep your safety net intact. And remember the people who love you back home. You can't run away from yourself by crossing an ocean. Your problems, your character, and your demons come with you wherever you go. Thank you for hearing me out. Even writing this has been therapeutic in a way. If it helps one person avoid the mistakes I made, then maybe some good can come from my disaster. Thanks for listening. A former backpacker from Ireland.